Pardon the interruption, I'm Kyle King. Welcome back to another episode of King's Court. Welcome back to Foster the Meeple, a channel all about board games and board gamey things. Buckle in, folks, because today things are going to get a little bit dicey because I'm going to go over 5 games in the top 100 on BGG that I think are overrated and 5 that I also think are underrated. Now, I want to preface this real quick. Overrated has a very negative connotation. Like if I say something's overrated, it's automatically assumed that I don't like it, or that I think it's bad, or that I think the person that likes it is dumb. And I just hope you guys realize that's not the case. Now, as I go over these these games I consider overrated, I'm going to be a little hyperbolic and I'm going to get a little bit passionate, possibly. This is just for fun. When I say overrated, it means this game is ranked something on BGG and I think it's higher than what it should be. And same thing for underrated. These are games that I like, I just don't understand why they're so low. And this is for me. Let's dive right in. We'll start off positive and we'll go with the first underrated game on my list. And this is at number 94. It's going to be Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. Now, this game is underrated to me because of what it does is not necessarily unique, but it really invokes the theme. Now, I'm not much of a campaign co-op person at all. I rarely play cooperative. I play campaign games even less, but this one just really excites me. And I'm not even that big of a Lord of the Rings fan. I didn't watch the movies until last year, and I do like them quite a bit, but it's just fun to dive in that fantasy world, and the components are really nice. And what I really like about Journeys in Middle-earth is that it's app-based and it tells you what tiles to put out, and you start off with 2 tiles on your table. You can see which way you can explore, but you don't know what's necessarily coming. So it really gives you the exploration and discovery aspect. I'm just surprised it's not higher considering the theme, considering the components, considering how much content there actually is out there for it. I'm just a little surprised it's not higher than 94, especially considering Mansions of Madness, which is its predecessor, is so high up. All right, so let's go into overrated. My first overrated game in the top 100 is going to be at 95, and that's Raiders of the North Sea. Raiders of the North Sea is from Shem Phillips and Garphill Games. I actually like Garphill Games pretty well. I think more people like Garphill Games more than I do, but I like the West Kingdom trilogy. I love Paladins, and Architects is a pretty good game. But Raiders of the North Sea is a game to me that makes a very good first impression or a very good second impression, and then it really falls off after that. It's kind of like the movie Beer Fest. You watch that in high school and it's the funniest thing in the world, and then you watch it 16 years later and it's horrendous. Raiders of the North Sea is just has a really unique worker placement mechanism of placing on a worker, taking the action, and then picking up a worker, and that's your new worker for the next round. And when you pick up a worker, you also take that action, so you get 2 actions around. That is unique. The problem with that is all the actions are pretty boring, and you have to do a lot of them before you get to do the cool thing of raiding, which is how you're going to get points. But the problem is when you go raiding, you kind of destroy everything you've just built up. And thematically that makes sense because you're Vikings and you're going to Valhalla and all of that. It just kind of frustrates me. You spend so much time building up your engine only to kind of have to strip it away. And I'm just kind of surprised it gets this much love because it's never exciting for a Viking raiding game. I would just rather play Champions of Midgard. I'd rather play Blood Rage, which is drastically different, but there's just better games that invoke Vikings to me. All right, back to underrated. My second underrated game is going to be at 85, and this is going to be Keyflower. Keyflower, I'm sure was higher up on the list before. I think it's just kind of dropped. You don't hear very many people talk about Keyflower anymore. I don't know if it's not readily available. I think it's in print still, but Keyflower is kind of like an auction worker placement game where everybody has meeples behind a screen, and you can either use those meeples to bid on tiles to put in your little city, or you can put them on tiles in your city or in other people's cities to take that action. And it's just a really fun mechanism. A lot of interesting play between the players at the table, while also being just a really good worker placement game and resource management game. It's just such a solid Euro. It has a ton of interaction. So 85 just seems low for just how balanced and how thinky that game is. My next overrated game, I have a feeling this one might get a ton of pushback. This is number 74, and it is 5 Tribes. Five Tribes is not my style. I actually have problems with Five Tribes because it's not just the AP thing. So in Five Tribes, if you don't know, it's kind of like a Mancala system. And if you don't know what Mancala is, it's just like you pick up everything and then you drop it off one by one on different spots until you drop off your last one. And Five Tribes does that. And at first I was like, oh my God, that's really cool. Each meeple, there are 5 tribes. There are 5 different meeples, and each meeple triggers a different action. And so that's really interesting. That's really cool. I understand the appeal of 5 tribes. The problem with 5 tribes is I think this could be my group's meta problem, but the green meeple gives you an action of buying cards, and those cards are like used for set collection points. And I have found that to just be kind of broken and OP. And I also think set collection is like kind of a boring mechanism in gaming in general. So when you're taking this game that has a lot of AP of like what's the best move, really thinking about like where you want to drop off these meeples, and like the best thing to do is set collection, it just kind of bores me. Some of the actions are just more fun, but they're not as lucrative points wise. Honestly, I see why people like it, but I just 74 is still too high. I don't know if it needs to be in the top 100, honestly, but that is just me. So my next underrated game is going to be 76, The Voyages of Marco Polo. That game is underrated because of exclamation point camels, and that is exclusively for middle class Joe in the Discord. He gives me a hard time about liking Marco Polo because I call things out for being boring, and he makes fun of that you can get camels. That's not the only reason Marco Polo is underrated. Marco Polo is a worker placement with dice game. So everybody has 5 dice and you roll them. Whatever you roll is the power on that die. So if you roll a 1, it's not going to get you as good of items or what you necessarily need to do. Like if you need to use it for movement, it's only going to get you 1 movement spot. Whereas like a dice with a 5 can get you 5 movement spots. But the thing with those dice is if somebody already goes to an action space that you want to go to, you can still go there, but it's going to cost you the pips on your die. So if somebody already went to the spot to move and you also needed to move this round because you just have to because moving is hard, you will go there, and if you need to move 5 spots, you're spending $5. And money is tight, and all the resources are tight, and it's just like a constant, like you're never going to be able to do everything. Middleweight Euros, like your Marco Polos, like your Lorenzo Magnificos, and your Choix, and those middleweight Euros, it's a very crowded field, and I think they're all kind of competing with each other, and it's hard for them to like stake claim. And it's a little bit of an older title and had a second rendition, so I'm sure that's why it's at 76. I just think it's a little bit better than that. My next overrated game comes in at number 48, and this actually has 2 games on the top 100, which is a completely separate problem, which I will get into later, I promise you. But number 48 is The Crew, and The Crew is a cooperative trick-taking game. I am from the Midwest. I love trick-taking. I grew up on euchre. I mean, I think euchre could be one of the reasons I fell in love with board gaming, because I just loved gaming with my family. I love playing cards on holidays, and so trick-taking is in my blood. So when I heard about The Crew, I was like excited because I like trick-taking games. Even though I'm not a big cooperative player, I was down to try because I've played the Mind before, and I knew it was kind of like a mix of the Mind where you're not speaking. But The Crew doesn't really work for me for a few reasons. First reason is I like trick-taking games because like euchre and spades, because it's kind of like mindless and just like conversational game. I like playing euchre at holidays because we would have the football game on and we would all just be talking about the football game, and you're just kind of just playing cards. And I know people are like, well, that sounds dumb, and it might be, but that's why one of the reasons I like it. It's like comfort food. And in The Crew, you're not allowed to talk. It's all silent. Somebody's going to say like, you can't talk. Yeah, you technically can talk, but you're not supposed to. It's supposed to be silence because you're all trying to win certain tricks and you can't talk about it. Honestly, if you can't talk about it, is it really cooperative if you're not working together? So that's another problem. My second problem with The Crew is it's pretty dang easy. If you have played trick-taking games like me and all of my friends have, we've never struggled to complete a mission, and we may have lost twice out of like 30 plays, and we won that mission the next time we played it. And it didn't matter if we started with the first one or we started with mission 40. We just found it pretty easy to win. And yeah, things got dicey, and there were those fun moments of like, oh, I hope he plays this because I need to play this card. There was that. The Crew is not necessarily like a heinous game. I don't think it's a 0 out of 10. I'm shocked that it's in the top 50. Absolutely shocked. I don't understand why there are so many better trick-taking taking games. There are so many better cooperative games. There are so many better hidden information games. I just think it kind of was like unique at the time, and like I think it just shot up the charts because of like what it did. It's like, oh my god, a cooperative trick taking game, automatically I'm in. But it just doesn't work for me, and I think I speak for the other people at FTM. They also think The Crew is overrated. But let's move on to another underrated game, and this one you guys might think is kind of weird that I'm calling it underrated. 62 is Azul, and you're thinking Azul has 5 different renditions, and base Azul is getting a second edition that's rethemed into chocolate, and you're like, how is that underrated? Well, just because it's at 62, really. I think Azul is the perfect entry level game. It's very easy to teach. It's beautiful. It's very quick to play. It's as interactive as you want it to be. It's as interactive as the players want it to be. I like to play a pretty cutthroat hate drafting game of Azul. Like when I play with Jeff, he also likes to play that style. And it's more of like, we are trying to get the highest score we can, but we're also trying to stick the other person to where they have 10 tiles at the bottom, because that's going to get them negative points. So if you can't place tiles, you have to put them on the bottom of your board, and that's like negative points. And you're just trying to stick a person with negative points. It's so much fun. It creates such memorable moments. I don't know how many times we've cursed at each other through Discord based on our Azul plays, but you can also not do that. You can completely ignore what the other person is doing and just focus on you and have just as good of a time. And it's also the same thing with like why I like trick taking games. You can kind of shut your mind off and just play the game. You can play it outside. This is a game I play with my wife out on our patio, and it's just a really fun summertime game. Great game for couples, great game for game groups. You can play it at 2 or 4. It's still going to hit. 62 is woefully low in my opinion. I think it's just a perfect entry level game. It should be way higher. Anytime anybody asks me for a suggestion to get into board games, I think Azul would be right there with everything. My next overrated game is at number 28, Viticulture. Now, Viticulture is by Stonemaier Games. It is a worker placement game where you are making wine. And I don't even drink wine. I drink Pepsi. But you can't go to a party with ring-dings and Pepsi. Viticulture has a few issues for me. And I have played with Tuscany. I'm going to stop you right there, commenters, and say, have you played with Tuscany? Yes, I've played with Tuscany. Tuscany does make the game a little bit better. I don't hate Viticulture. I did own it for a while, and the only reason I got rid of it is because I have 2 friends that also owned Viticulture. So if they didn't own Viticulture, I would still own it. I'm kind of like baffled that it's like people's number 1 game. It is a worker placement game that doesn't do worker placement in like a super unique way. The Grande Worker, I guess, is kind of a neat implementation of worker placement. But what I don't like is that it's never really about the wine. It's a lot of card draws. And I like card drawing. I don't mind randomness in my games. But when it becomes like a race to find cards, and it's not even the card problem. Like if the cards just built your engine instead of giving you points, I'm all for it. And I've heard the Visitors from the Rhine, whatever the newest expansion was, the Rhine Valley expansion, I've heard it fixes a bit, and I've not had a chance to play with it. So bear with me there. Viticulture should be about making the wine, right? You should be making wine. You should be fulfilling wine contracts to win the game. And you don't really have to do that. And if you do that, you only really have to do it once. And that's over 7 rounds. And that just doesn't sit well with me. Another problem I have, and this may just be a me thing, is I like Scythe, what Scythe does with how money is points. And I think that was a big miss with Viticulture. I think money should have been who decides the winner. It just makes more thematic sense to me. If you're running a wine business, points is so abstracted out and money is tangible. And it makes sense. Like you ran the best vineyard, you can prove it flush with cash, John Ralphio style. My last underrated game comes at 52. I'm going to say right now, this game is in my top 10. I tried not to do this because like I've already have a top 10 video. You guys and gals already know I like those 10 games. So I tried not to do this, but this one could not be ignored. 52 is Clans of Caledonia. I'm really wondering how it's not higher ranked, and it's got to be because just not being really in print anymore. 52 is still pretty high for a game that came out a few years ago and not really in print, I guess, but I think it should be so much higher. It gets its design philosophy from Terra Mystica and Gaia Project. Both those games are also in the top 100. I think Terra Mystica is like 22 and Gaia Project 7. So it gets its system from 2 games that are higher up already. So that makes me think it's underrated. But it takes that system and it puts an economic spin on it. And it puts the stock market in there. And you're constantly manipulating the stock market and trying to sell. And it has contract fulfillment and it has area control. And it just has all these little Euro bits that everybody seems to love. And I can't believe Clans of Caledonia doesn't get more praise for what it does. The actions are relatively simple when you compare it to other Euros. It's not a bad looking game. It's a relatively small box. It was pretty inexpensive when you could get it. I'm just like, I can't believe it just never got as high as some of these other middle to heavyweight Euros like Gaia Project, like Terra Mystica, and those games are infinitely harder to learn. Clans of Caledonia, I could teach you Clans of Caledonia in 20 minutes. Gaia Project, I've played 6 times and I'm still not sure I'm playing it correctly. That's my last underrated game. I tried not to pull games from my top 10, but that one I just could not ignore it. I'm still shocked Clans of Caledonia is not in the top 50. My last overrated game, it's your big boy. It is the #1 game of all time. It is Gloomhaven. I've mentioned with the crew that the crew had 2 games in the top 100 and it shouldn't. This was the other one that does that, and that's Jaws of the Lion. Jaws of the Lion is at number 5. Gloomhaven has 2 games in the top 5. Jaws of the Lion is the exact same game as Gloomhaven. That makes no sense to me, and Jeff brought this up on a previous video because we were discussing this. We were discussing how like Gloomhaven has 2 games, the crew has 2 games, Agricola has 2 games, TI4 and TI3 are both on there, Brass has 2 games, and it's really like if the games are the same system and there's nothing really that can like truly separate them, like the Pandemic Legacies, I get, put all of them separate. They're completely different games. BGG has to figure something out with having the same game in the top 100 twice, and I say this as like a 0th world problem. Like, who the heck cares? This is BGG's top 100. It's not that big a deal. But like in the context of this argument, it is kind of a big deal for what this is. It just doesn't make sense to me why Gloomhaven should have the game #1 and game #5, and when Frosthaven releases, whenever that gets out delivered, it's also going to be in the top 5. I guarantee you Gloomhaven has 3 games in the top 5 when Frosthaven releases, and that's absurd to me. But let's go into why I think Gloomhaven is a little overrated. Gloomhaven is now 5 years old. When Gloomhaven came out, and 1 year after Gloomhaven came out, if it was #1, I'm all for it. I understood in 2019 why Gloomhaven was #1. It just doesn't make sense to me now in 2022 why Gloomhaven is #1. It is a dungeon crawler that was kind of a first adopter. It wasn't the first dungeon crawler, but it did something that made you pay attention. It gave you 90 scenarios. It gave you an RPG video game level of like leveling up and building a character. It gave you tons of content. It gave you tons of map tiles. It gave you tons of minis. It was a Kickstarter that was like over $100 and some. When Gloomhaven came out on Kickstarter and it released, everybody was like, oh my God, I got this massive box. This is so phenomenal. Look at all this content I got. And it was exciting. I get it. When I got Gloomhaven, I was so excited. I took a picture. My daughter was 1 at the time. I took a picture of her with the box to compare sizes. It was a joy to get Gloomhaven. But now, like, I'm not even sure if Gloomhaven is like my biggest box on my shelf. I don't even know if it's in the top 4. It set that trend, which I don't know if is great actually, but it set a lot of things in place, but it's almost been surpassed. There are tons of dungeon crawlers, and now those dungeon crawlers have apps to assist because Gloomhaven is a ton of maintenance. The Gloomhaven Helper app, which is not produced by Gloomhaven, it was like some third party created it, is a huge help. But if you don't have that, let's say you don't have that, it's so much upkeep. It's so much dealing with monsters and health and flipping through a rule book and checking statuses and the monster movement. Oh my God, the monster movement is ridiculous. I had a note in my phone every time I played to like bring up when we needed to do monster movement to check to make sure we were doing it right. And like, to be honest with you folks, I'm not sure we were still doing the movement correct. I don't get as frustrated with losing in other games as I do with Gloomhaven. Losing Gloomhaven sucks. It sucks so hard because if you lose, you gotta replay that mission. If you lose, you just spent 4 hours. If you lose, you just did all of this setup. You just got your game group together. You scheduled this night. And like, I'm a person who thinks cooperative should be hard. I like Spirit Island. I like how tight Pandemic is. Every time it's a race. Robinson Crusoe, brutal. I want my co-ops to be hard. But with Gloomhaven and it being a campaign and it being a long campaign, 60 some scenarios to play through the main storyline, 90 if you want to play all the side missions or something like that. So when you lose, it sucks. Oh my gosh. We've been playing Gloomhaven for literally 4 years. We're almost done. I think we have 4 or 5 scenarios left. And losing is terrible. It's the reason it's taking so long. This is maybe more of a me problem, but I get kind of quarterbacky in Gloomhaven because I don't want to lose. I care so much about winning. I kind of wish we would have house ruled it that where if we lose, maybe we just don't get experience points, we don't get coins, but we can move on, because it's really made it to the point where it's just annoying. It puts me in a bad mood. I think about what I did wrong, and that's not the case for other games. Between Jaws of the Lion and base Gloomhaven, I'm well over 100 hours. I also think the scenarios have gotten kind of stale, are all pretty much just kill all the monsters. There's nothing truly unique about them, and it's a masterpiece in like balancing. Don't get me wrong. The monsters and the mini and all the different characters and how they all interact with the map and how balanced it is mathematical genius. Give them props. Between that and the card play, I get why it was number one in the first place, truly. But they are, like, after playing this many hours of it, like, nothing excites me about Gloomhaven anymore. I just can't envision these last 5 scenarios showing me something that I haven't already seen in the previous 50 I've played. That's kind of a tough pill to swallow for me. I'm just, like, really, really surprised that so many people have been, like, so okay with that. And I think other campaign games, they may not give you the scenarios quantity that Gloomhaven gives you, but sometimes less is more. Like, Destiny's was 5 scenarios, and that was perfect. I think people got excited about more content because that's what our hobby is. We're always searching for expansions. We're always searching for more. When we back stuff on Kickstarter, we go all in. I'm no stranger to this. I have all of Ankh. I have not played all of Ankh. I will never play all of Ankh. So that's kind of my issues with Gloomhaven, and I think there's a few reasons why it's still number one. I think it got a huge influx of 10s when it got released. Because for all the reasons I stated, I think it gets a huge influx of 10s because it was kind of the first of its kind. And to be fair, it did get 10s because it is a good design. I still like Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven is still an excellent game. The design is great. What Isaac Childress did is genius level. He deserves all the success he got, and I hope it keeps coming for him. Frosthaven's going to be another massive hit. I'm not taking anything away from the game because I do like it. However, I think people have rated it 10s for superfluous reasons over gameplay reasons. I think it's a game that deserves to be in like the top 20, top 15. That would not shock me. But the fact that it's still number one 5 years after release is kind of crazy to me. You may ask me, well, Kyle, if Gloomhaven is not number one, what should be? And maybe you're not asking me that. I don't know. But if I had to pick a game for BGG number one, I'm not going to pick Blood Rage, which is my number one game of all time. I get why people have problems with Blood Rage, or why it may not be everybody's cup of tea. If I had to pick a game for BGGs, board gamer as a whole, number one, what game do I think would make the most sense as the number one game of all time? It would be Brass. Between a combo of Birmingham and Lancashire. Make them one entry and make them the number one game. I think Brass does things so well. It's complex, but it's not so complex that not everybody can learn it, I think. There are a few touchy rules that are kind of fiddly, especially in Birmingham. It is relatively easy actions. You're playing cards to take actions. I think it has a ton of player interaction. So I think people that like player interaction will like Brass. I like people that like economic games will like Brass. I think people who like Euro games will like Brass. I think people who Ameritrash may even like Brass because the theme does kind of come out. It's very thematic. There is some luck involved, and there's a lot of strategy, and there's a lot of like player manipulation, and there's just a lot of ways to win the game and to be competent at the game. And I also think you can not be that great at it and still have a good time because you're still doing something. You can still have turns that feel good. So that's the game that I think as a community, I'm surprised is not number one. But there you have it, folks. Those are 5 games that I think are overrated and 5 games that I think are underrated in the BGG top 100. I know I prefaced it at the beginning, but I cannot go without saying again that this was all in fun. If you think I'm wrong, please tell me, but just don't be a jerk about it. If I called one of your favorite games overrated, I don't think any less of you. I still think all of these games are great. There's a reason they're in the top 100. I'm in the minority if I say it's overrated. Obviously, I get it. I just think it's fun to kind of talk about this stuff and get into debates of like, this is overrated, this is underrated. I think it creates a lot of good dialogue. If you're interested in buying any games, such as from the BGG Top 100, may I first suggest checking out your friendly local game store. If you're ever in Columbus, check out the Guard Tower on Trabue. If you're ever in Halifax, go to the Boardroom Game Cafe on Barrington. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, comment below, let's chat. Come and join us in the Discord, we'll chat there. And I think that's all. All right, stay sweet, bye. and the mind is okay. It's not really a game. Like excuse me. The next reason is I think it's overrated. I just lost my thought. Give me a second here, Jamie. I'm sorry. I believe. Oh, okay. I know what my point is. Sorry, Jamie. That's a lot of editing for you.